Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm here to introduce Andrew Parker, who is an artist and architect based in Spokane, Washington. He studied photography and architecture at Montana State University, earning a BA in environmental design. He received a Master of Architecture from the University of Houston. His studio practice spans both studio and public art, with recent projects including murals for the residence halls in Bozeman, Montana, and a Spokane elementary school library. His work has been exhibited at the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture, the Junt Museum, Art Museum, and venues throughout Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Please help me welcome Andrew Parker to EOU.
Good evening. How's the sound? All right. Thank you, Corey. I'm really excited to be here. I grew up in Oregon, not in LeGrand, but Grants Pass, Oregon, southwest corner. So I see some nods. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back a little bit to art from when I was a kid, and I feel like that's a good. So I'm going to share a little bit about kind of art throughout my life and kind of how I got to where I am at the moment. So this is obviously very young art. This was more in high school. So both of my parents were park rangers growing up. We spent a lot of time outside, a lot of time hiking, and at this stage, I really considered the good art to be art that looked like a photograph. That was my goal at the time. So I wanted to paint wildlife, and I wanted to make it look as real and accurate as possible. I also had the opportunity to do several large community-based art projects, and so these are fiberglass bears, and mine is not in this image, but I don't know if LeGrand ever did that. Other cities have done bison or pelicans or moose I've seen. So this was a great experience. I think I was a freshman or a sophomore in high school. And by far the youngest person. And we had a big warehouse with partitioned cubicles of every artist, probably 25 artists, most of whom were professional career artists, sometimes teams painting these bears. And that was a really phenomenal experience as a teenager to get to interact with all of these other local artists and see what and how they did what they were doing. So like I mentioned, really focused on kind of natural art. And this is not the exact piece, but this artist is the first artist that I remember seeing and understanding contemporary art. So this is El Ansui. This is on a more recent trip to LA County Museum of Art. But I think that it was probably at the LA County Museum of Art that I first saw his work. We were probably there for the La Brea Tar Pits. But this stood out. If you're unfamiliar with his work, he's a Ghanaian artist, and all of these pieces are repurposed metal, bottle caps, beer cans, things that have been cut up and wired and sewn together, and this has this really kind of beautiful textile, fabric-like quality. So from Oregon, I went to Montana State, like Corey said, and which was a very different environment, studying architecture and photography, shifted kind of my art interest from large-scale kind of acrylic painting to more field sketching, kind of being out and about. It was pretty pragmatic, and we really focused on kind of intentional, sustainable design. At the very end of that time, I got a job at an architecture firm in Korea, which is about as different from Montana as you can go. But it was really fantastic, and I feel like this image really kind of sums it up, because Seoul, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a really fascinating juxtaposition of very, very old and very, very new, and there's no real separation between the two. So it was a fantastic experience to be here, to be surrounded by prominent architecture, to be able to go to contemporary art museums. So kind of working in parallel, if you will, the art and architecture. And it would kind of take me a little bit longer to be able to reflect on the art impact of all of these experiences. But this is the office that I was at. And one of the things that was really neat, it was a 4-story building. The first floor was a French cafe, and then we had an art gallery that was part of the architecture firm. And so kind of art as a means to explore architecture was really part of that practice. And so this is that gallery space. And so I got to be involved in kind of curating that and exploring large scale kind of art installations through the lens of architecture. So from Korea, I moved to Houston, where I both worked in an architecture firm, but then also did grad school. And both grad school was substantially more kind of conceptual than my undergrad in terms of kind of an art-based architectural practice, and really explored concepts. And I had a fantastic professor who had a PhD in Japanese art and architecture, and I ended up having her for 3 studio semesters because we got along so well, and it was really really pushed me outside of kind of what I had envisioned as architecture. So I view this as kind of that real kind of key catalyst of moving into abstract art. And then you're in an area where, I mean, this is the Manila collection, and there's just like, there's so much fantastic art that was really easily accessible. This was a grad studio project, like this is an architecture project, as is this. And so, you know, obviously there's a lot of hand drawing and stuff in this, but very kind of art-based explorative. Simultaneously getting more and more into architectural drawing, you know, what are architects that are doing interesting architecture, how are they representing it? And so that has all kind of informed where I'm at. So in Spokane, an architect, practicing architecture, so I'm done with grad school finally. I have more time in the evenings, and in parallel to working on architecture projects, I'm spending free time going to other art institutions. I think that viewing art is really important to understanding both art and architecture, that you can't just view it on a screen or in a book, that you have to see it in person. And it's fun to be in. This is a Mark Bradford, these are all Mark Bradford, but this is a 52-foot mixed media piece, deep blue, I think. Really phenomenal. And Julie Moretu, this is her retrospective at the LA County Museum of Art. I think she studied architecture. A lot of her earlier work especially has included architectural drawings. And so again, kind of this oscillation of interest between art and architecture I found really interesting. So kind of in parallel while all of that is happening, I'm still sketching, you know, feeling more confident about doing things that aren't representational. Still making time to sketch, you know, what I see, but being looser, you know, not trying to represent what's there, but just thinking about what I find interesting about it. So similar to those grad school projects with some found objects, I started kind of collecting random miscellaneous things, and there's a lot of circles you can see. We'll come back to that. But I had initially had this vision of like doing something with them as kind of a mixed media piece that hasn't really come to fruition yet, but they have made their way into multiple paintings as kind of a stamped object, and patterning and surfacing and things like that. And then so this is like a rubber tube from a carburetor. And so kind of looking at things that are drawn with a stencil versus things that are stamped versus things that are hand drawn and hand painted, and kind of that relationship between order and, I don't like the term lack of order or disorder, because I feel like it's not quite the same. It's not chaos, but more of an organic feel. So still kind of exploring. These are egg cartons that have been stamped over and over again. Um, and so this is, I'm in Spokane, I'm working during the day, but I have free time. And so I'm exploring kind of more and more abstractly. This was one of the first kind of larger scale. This is 22 by 30 inches watercolor. And this was after a trip to Glacier National Park. And so sketching while hiking, this was effectively the trail between a heavily wooded area and a much more open field and a stream, and then like dandelion seeds. And so trying to take, like viewing a place in time kind of aerially from above, as an aerial perspective, trying to break down what's there and think about it in terms of kind of shapes and relationships rather than kind of actual colors. This was probably a turning point. This would have been after that trip to LA with some of the art museums, and I had all of this paper material, bus ticket, airplane, museum maps, etc. And so I'd been doing these circular studies and brought all this stuff home, and normally I would have just recycled it, but I was like, well, this is kind of interesting, and I had a hole punch. So I hole punched it and arranged it by color on one grid and then drew over it in another grid, and was really happy with how it turned out. So I've since then I have used the paper hole punches, and you'll see they vary in size and whatnot, but that was kind of the key starting point. So I brought it with me, this current sketchbook, but I always try and bring, or always have, a sketchbook with me. I find that it's hard to, you can't just find inspiration or suddenly be creative, that it kind of will surprise you, and often it's hard to capture that moment of creativity if you don't have some way to write it down. So we'll go through a series of these, but I don't know, in architecture school we always had a sketchbook like the grain silas that I showed, and it was always kind of a point of pride, and like there's this architectural expectation that sketchbooks are kind of a certain thing, and I struggled with having this expectation of what I wanted out of the sketchbook. And I would always get pretty large, nice watercolor paper sketchbooks, and I would get through a few pages where I had a lot of time to work on that particular drawing, and inevitably there would be a drawing or a few drawings that I wouldn't be able to finish, or I didn't like how they turned out, or I didn't have enough time to do them the way that I wanted to. And so then I would start over. I'd get another sketchbook and I'd start over. And it was really when I moved to these, this is like a pocket notebook, like 3.5 by 5 kind of note card size. Moved to a much smaller notebook where the notebook itself no longer felt precious. That was kind of a key change, because then what became important was the idea that it was capturing. It made it a lot easier for me to just scribble stuff in it to capture the idea rather than trying to create a finished drawing. And sometimes these are more realistic or relationship based too. Obviously these are very landscape kind of oriented. And so then we're going back and forth between something like this and something like this, where this is intended to evoke natural feelings without being a landscape. Sometimes they're more colorful, but still some of those landscape elements are in there. And so just always, whatever, things that are interesting, make it in, and color combinations, and just like reflecting on work that I've done in the past and ideas for new work. So some of the full-size paintings we'll look at kind of came out of these series of studies. So that brings me to the art that's in the gallery today. And so these are some of those works that are based on those sketches I just mentioned. And so the right panel is an enlarged version of the overall piece. And there's several of these, but this particular series, these three, also incorporate the cut paper collage. And so you can see, like, this is a paper grocery bag, there's newspaper, there's various magazines, this is a security envelope, this is like an outdoor wildlife guide, this is from Walden, Henry David Thoreau, and so maps, there are a lot of maps. Some of these are like photographs that I've taken, some of the larger ones they're called out. So trying to embed kind of this layer of intrigue within the overall pieces. And I'll share some earlier work as we go through these, but just thinking of texture and perspective and but also like the color combination. I mean, these, I guess, to me, feel landscape-esque, but also feel like different types of landscapes. And, you know, if you think of agricultural lines and how those make it in, you know, the egg carton is still here, which always fascinates me. This stamped kind of face piece and the yellow ones that are upside down. And if you let's see if we get a close up. This is like a smartphone. So I think so I mentioned I studied photography, and at one point I had wanted to be like a landscape or wildlife photographer, and I spent a lot of time going to national parks and, you know, wild and scenic spaces, and have a lot of photographs that I'm proud of. But you went to, I feel like maybe social media ruined it for me, because you'd go to the scenic overlook or the photo opportunity, and there'd be, you know, a dozen other people there taking the exact same photo. And even though it's a beautiful moment and scene, I don't know, I felt weird about that. Like, why, like, continuing to share it. I mean, I think it's important for those spaces, but it's creatively, it felt kind of uninteresting, I suppose. So, yeah, the iPhone relating to landscape. So you can see some more of those, you know, different photographs. So breaking from the circle a little bit. So I guess one of the things that I find interesting is how to convey kind of one idea from perhaps further afar, and as you get closer, your experience changes and you can see more within the overall piece. This is one of the newest ones I've just finished, and is the first to include text like this. So the text is a passage from the 1916 Organic Act, which created the national parks, and effectively says that you know, it should be the scenery and wildlife and the historic objects within should be preserved for future generations. And so I really liked that message, and trying to bring in conceptually, you know, this is, to me, a painting about landscape, about wild spaces, but it's not, it's perhaps further even from some of the other ones. So on top of the concept of the text, all of the paper hole punches, all these cut circles, are from conservation reports or travel guides or national park maps or things like that relate to landscape and the preservation of natural spaces. So I'll share a little bit about kind of how these are created. So this is my studio at home, and this is obviously a portion of it. It's a great, it's fairly small, but it's pretty hardworking. I'm able to do three large pieces like this. This is 40 by 44, all at the same time, and probably 3 to 5 smaller pieces on the wall, in addition to kind of these flat files where I can do other pieces. So usually working on more than one thing at a time. I find that useful for the way that I work. I'll try and do kind of have a sequence of things, and I might try something in one piece and apply it to another. But this is a great drawer. So all of those paper circles are often, sometimes they're found and created specifically for a piece, and I'm kind of moving more and more in that direction. But initially, a lot of them were found and created and painted and cut without necessarily having a piece specifically in mind. And so I have several drawers of all of these different color-coded, size, organized, cut paper circles that then would be individually glued onto each piece. So these are some of the works in progress. So here's kind of a step-by-step of, and this piece is actually in the gallery. And so you can see, starting with a grid, it's very architectural. And just like in architecture, I find the grid kind of representational of like a system, like an organizing system. So it's the structure that allows the painting to kind of grow in a systematic kind of way. But then it also kind of creates this set of rules that we'll come back to in a minute. But and then these drawn elements that, so using different line weights and line colors as the painting is building kind of from those construction lines. So these are all cut paper circles. This is a brown paper grocery bag that's been painted with white acrylic paint and then cut into 2 different sizes. And this piece is very much based on an area, kind of a forgotten, like it's a natural area, but it's just kind of by the side of the road. But it's still a really nice space to be. And there's a little trail that gets kind of mossy in the wintertime. And we would take our kids there over the pandemic when you couldn't go anywhere else. So, okay, we've got the paper circles, and then using a stencil to draw larger circles individually over that, still using that same grid. This is a mask, so then I've come back in with kind of splatter painted to get these kind of textures throughout, filling some of those pieces in based on the marks that have been, that come before. Additional colors. Again, the egg carton drawn pieces. There's the that carburetor tube again from some of those really early studies, and then the final piece. So this has been filled in. There's a lot of those smaller kind of green cut paper circles within this, and then these are some of those found objects that were in that drawer that I mentioned at the beginning that have been. So these are like punch outs from metal studs from a construction site, corrugated cardboard, things like that. So this is, I guess, a little bit of how I think about each one of these. Again, they're not specific. I mean, that last one was a specific example, a specific location. They're not trying to be usually a specific location, but more of kind of an idea of a location or a type of location. I think living in the West, the land has such a big impact on identity that the American West has such this large presence, and whether or not it exists in that capacity is, I don't know, something I feel like I'm exploring. So seeking paper that relates to that, and then trying to find kind of forms and colors that relate. Again, we mentioned the grid and the paper kind of circle layering. And there you can see it gets cut out and hole punched, and just layered and layered and layered and layered. Lots of little things get drawn in there throughout. And then this is kind of important to me, I guess. This is that yellow piece with the circle I mentioned after LA, and one of the, I had a show pretty early on after I finished. I had that piece and 2 others that were similar, and I got a lot of comments where people assumed that they were done digitally because they're so organized, I guess. And I feel like I've gotten better at that, or can explain it more now. But one of the things that I did then, and this continues, is to highlight mistakes. Part of the intersection, the layering of multiple really kind of complex structures like this, when it is all hand drawn, inevitably you have mistakes. Instead of starting over like I did with sketchbooks, I've tried to highlight those mistakes. So in this case, these bright red circles are on the wrong grid line. They're on the other, and so I've highlighted them all red throughout the piece. Here, creating a series of rules based on kind of the condition that occurred, that outer box would be filled in on different colors. And if I missed it when I was actively doing all of that, then instead of going back and filling it in again, I called it out in a different way. So when you look at the whole piece, and we'll come back to that, you can't really tell, but I think that it kind of adds a level of organicness, kind of unintentionality, in the same way that the hole punches do, where I'm not controlling, for the most part, what's what they bring to the composition, the little bits of text and things that are in there. Kind of the same thing with those. Oh, this is the same. I was unhappy with this one, and so I colored over it. So I mentioned sketching, and oftentimes I'll start with, I find that when I'm sketching, very rarely do I have an idea for a complete painting, start to finish, and so I'll have kind of isolated ideas that will maybe be a single layer or kind of a technique or something that I'll want to include. So I'll take those sketches, and these are 4 by 4 inches, but on the material that I like to paint on, and so I'll do color studies and kind of compositional studies. I'll make those larger, and this one is actually in the studio. This is just a little 8 by 10 sketch. So looking at kind of more detailed, larger versions of potential paintings. And then here's that painting in progress and the final painting. And then at the Seattle Art Fair, so you can kind of see it in context. As my work got larger, it was, so these are all museum board, which is an architectural material used to make all the little white models. And so I was familiar with it. I liked it. It works well with ink and glue and things like that. And so I had been doing that just as a paper material, and then I started gluing it onto panels. So I could go larger. And when I outgrew the size of the museum board itself, I started cutting it up. So this piece is 50 inches by 60 inches, and you kind of see the wood panel in between some of these windows. And so I created, a series. I took several pieces of this museum board and created the grid or the pattern, and then these all have the paper grocery bag, and then I cut them up and put them as kind of the base layer of the composition, and then drawing forms kind of over that. And then the final kind of piece has this is probably much less gridded than the previous version, or than some of the early ones where just because the paper is cut. So trying to play with that. This piece is in the gallery, and I'm just highlighting like pieces that are drawn kind of within the overall composition. And so what is landscape-esque, but is fairly abstract, hopefully allows for more intrigue and more reason to kind of get up close and view what's there. So kind of another early piece. But a lot of these are all made with drafting dots. So again, kind of going back to architecture school, covering this in drafting dots, and then spray painting it to have this negative form of the circle. The egg carton again. So this is that complete piece. I called out, I don't know if it's on here, yeah, the elements where I had missed it, so I went back and I drew over it. Again, a fairly agricultural piece, thinking of fence line, kind of an exploded barn, street lines and road signs and agricultural markings and textures in the field. This piece was actually done as a commission for a retiring architect. And so this was a really interesting way to combine both interests, I suppose. And so all of the hole punches, all these paper circles are photographs of projects that he worked on. And so we met and went through all the photographs that he had and kind of talked about color scheme and whatnot, and then worked through to kind of put this together. And it was really interesting. The reason that he was interested in having me do this as a retirement gift was because he wanted to remember all the projects, but also didn't want to just have like corporate architectural photos in his home. And so this way, it's an art piece from afar, but as you get close to it, oh, remember that's this building, and that's when I worked on this project, and these are like inch circles, inch and a half circles maybe, and the inch. So they're still large enough that you can kind of see the specific building and the details within there. I was asked to do this as a fundraiser. So Herman Miller, Seattle, donated the chair, and I got to paint on it to support some interior design legislation in Washington State. So this was a super fun, also a little bit nerve-wracking experience, because I would have never thought to, one, paint on plastic, but two, paint on such a curved surface. And then it was a great opportunity to challenge myself to take my art style that is very kind of organized and on a two-dimensional grid, and think about it on something that is very much not griddable. So that was a good exploration. Yeah, I think we'll can end there. So thank you, and I hope to see you all on Friday and answer more questions.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to our online audience. And we'll pause there and we'll open it up for questions.